Hello, and welcome to the Visible Women Podcast. I'm Corinne Corbett, and along with co-host Kim DeBrew, we put issues related to diversity, inclusion, and appearance in the spotlight and examine how they impact the lives of women of color. So on today's episode, we want to talk about race. Yes, race. And I know that sometimes is an uncomfortable subject, but I think it's important that we understand our responsibility in having these discussions. I stumbled across some research done earlier this year by Pew Research, and it stated as the United States becomes more racially and ethnically diverse, and as companies from Wall Street to Silicon Valley grapple with how to build workforces that reflect some of these changing demographics, Americans have complicated, even contradictory set of views about the impact of diversity and the best way to achieve it. Most of them say it's a good thing that the country has a diverse population, but many also say this introduction has its own set of challenges. But when it comes to diversity in the communities where they live, most of U.S. adults, at 65%, including a majority of those who live in neighborhoods with little diversity, are satisfied with the racial mix in their area. A majority, 54%, say that children should go to local schools, even if that results in most schools being less diverse. Fewer, at 42%, say they should go to schools that are racially and ethnically mixed, even if that means some students go to schools outside of their local community. And when it comes to the new majority, meaning that non-white will become the majority as the population trend goes, most Americans say having a population that is racially and ethnically mixed enhances U.S. culture, but view it more negatively when the public is asked about the prospects of Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians and other racial minorities making up the majority of the population, which the U.S. Census Bureau projects will happen by 2050. But in children, it's already happening. In a separate survey conducted, Moore said having a majority non-white population will weaken American customs and values. That was 38% of people thought that. Then said it would strengthen them. And some said it wouldn't have an impact at all. So obviously this is a confusing subject to many. And sometimes diversity is fine as long as it's not in your own backyard.
Yeah, I'm really happy that we are elevating a conversation beyond the workplace, which is generally what we've been covering on this podcast. We're going to talk about the places where people live and play. And I was thinking about a documentary film I saw a couple of months ago at a screening called Bias. And in the film, the filmmaker talks about a story that broke in 2016 about a website called nextdoor.com. Now, it's intended to be a virtual hangout for neighbors, to stay connected, to find a last-minute babysitter, to plan a local event, or share safety tips. But in an Oakland community, the messages started to appear on this web forum that sounded like this: 2 young African Americans, slim, baggy pants, early 30s. Or another said, light-skinned Black female walking her dog and talking on the cell phone. I didn't recognize her, post read. Has anyone described a suspect of crime like her? And so local police departments in Oakland use this website, nextdoor.com, to communicate with residents. And as the users grew, community members complained that this site could be a magnet for racial profiling, with African American and Latino residents as suspects in their own neighborhoods. And so to your point about the stats of sort of a confluence of things, which is the demographics in this country are shifting. Communities are having to wrestle with who their neighbor is, coded conversations, in my view, about what a good neighborhood is, who good people are. And those conversations are laden with assumptions about what you believe to be true about Black and brown people, right? Them as your neighbors, or where, frankly, those images were formed about what a good school is. And I love that in this conversation, we're going to sort of unpack some of those topics. What are we talking about instead of talking about race, right? The conversation is happening above the waterline, when in fact, perhaps if we addressed the underlying assumptions and issues more directly, we could have meaningful conversations and we could connect. So I love that our guest today is going to lift up some of the powerful things that she's doing within communities for us. So
I am delighted to introduce our guest for today. As Program Director for the South Orange Maplewood Community Coalition on Race, Audrey Rowe brings more than 25 years of management, marketing, and community organization experience garnered through Fortune 500 corporate positions, running her own personal business, and holding numerous leadership positions in the community, including the Columbia High School Home and School Association Executive Board, the South Orange Maplewood Adult School Board of Trustees, and the Prospect Presbyterian Church Board of Elders. Audrey specializes in developing creative programs to support the Community Coalition's organization goals and in mobilizing and supporting volunteers to execute those programs. She's adept at facilitating groups and meetings and serving as public advocate for the organization. An integral part of Audrey's work includes designing and coordinating strategic events. She graduated from Missouri University at Columbia and completed a master's at Kent State University. And she lives in Maplewood, New Jersey. And she's lived there for over 30 years. And it's very interesting that the South Orange Maplewood Coalition on Race has been in existence for over 20 years. So they have been talking about race and community for some time. So we are delighted to have Audrey on the Visible Women podcast. Welcome, Audrey.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kim and Corinne. You've kind of made some great, accolades that I hope that I can try and fill for both my community and for those people who are taking time to listen to what we have to share today. As Program Director for the Community Coalition on Race, I'm actually fulfilling a personal goal for myself. And that is my personal belief that there really is one humanity, and we have so many things that distort and distract us from that, racism being one of the major ones. So if we're going to get back to really being able to deal with, respect, and appreciate each other's individuals, we have to tear down these barriers. And I believe that a lot of the division that we experience is artificial, but we have to be intentional in removing those artificial barriers. One of the things that the reason why I think that racism is so pervasive and so insidious is that we never get to the real issues. I think that we tend as a nation and as individuals to smile and nod and grin, but we never get to what's really on our mind and what's really in our heart. And so as a result, we get to repeat ourselves and never make progress. So my goal, both personally and in working with this organization, is to try to break through some of that artificialness and get to the real issues, the real concerns, shine light into those dark spaces so we can see what can really move us forward. And in that goal, I'm working as an African-American female, very concerned about the condition of my own people, but concerned about the condition of all people. And I think that when we do not collectively respect and work and get the best of what everybody has to offer, we all lose. So we have a lot of allies here in our community, in the white community, as well as working with people of color and specifically Black people in Maplewood, South Orange, and in the region. I've lived here in Maplewood for 38 years, 37 years, but who's counting, with my husband. I have 2 adult daughters and a granddaughter, and just really feel that as a citizen of this community, I'm never done. I'm never retiring. There's too much yet to be done to just sit back when we see that there's so much that needs to be done. So I'm working to try to mobilize my neighbors, both new as well as those who've been here a long time like myself, to do the same.
That's a great place to start. So when you think about shining a light in those dark places and those conversations that perhaps are happening on a very superficial level, what would you say is in the way of us getting to a deeper conversation about race, about community in impactful ways? What's in the way?
I think a major barrier is the tendency just as human beings to not want to be wrong. We're fearful of making a mistake, of saying the wrong thing, of doing the wrong thing. If you're a person of color, you don't want to be that angry Black person, or you don't want to be accused of playing the race card. If you're not of color, you don't want to be considered a racist. So we have views and feelings, but we never air them candidly, and so we never grow. So I think it's getting beyond those personal fears to be able to really confront the things that are underlying racism in general.
So I love that part of your work is having conversations about race with children in your community. What brought that about, and how has that worked to kind of deepen conversation and to maybe take away the awkwardness before it begins?
Yes. Well, there are 2 things I can mention there that we're doing here. I think that it's very logical when you're trying to get to the root of any problem is, to start at the seedling before it grows roots. And so by starting with children and helping to create positive experiences before they even take on some of these negative stereotypes or expectations, we do them and ourselves a great advantage. We've started something called Talking to Children About Race because the children take their cues from us, from what parents say or sometimes don't say, even our nonverbal communication, how they see us respond when someone who doesn't look like us come into a room. And this goes for people who are of color as well as people who are not of color. The other thing that we've been working toward is giving kids early exposure. A lot of the fear that we have across race is from ignorance and unfamiliarity. We fear the unknown. That's another very kind of natural tendency. So to the extent that we can get our kids interacting with each other, playing with each other at a very young age, it's just like the sun coming up. You just expect it every day to see someone who doesn't look like you and have them be a friend. So we have an integrated play group that we sponsor once a month, and we try to keep it informal. We invite parents of all backgrounds to come with their children. We'll take them from newborns up to 5 years of age. And we get a twofer because not only do the parents come and bring their kids and the kids get to socialize and enjoy themselves, but while the kids are playing, the parents are also talking. And that's one of the great positive tools for building relationship is getting parents together of different backgrounds and races, because we all have in common the fact that we want the best for our children. And when we can kind of rally around and identify things that we have in common, it makes those things that seem different and scary less of an issue.
I have one follow-up question to that. So not that long ago, I was a parent of a very little person. And now, my goodness, I can't believe she's in 6th, almost 7th grade. But wow. I remember those early experiences in preschool and early elementary school where my very best and first friends were other parents. And so I think there is just amazing power in connecting families via their kids, right? Those early relationships. You're just trying to figure out how to be a parent, or maybe if you've had more kids, trying to figure out, all right, how do I juggle things? Maybe you need support and other things. So I think it's a brilliant strategy. And I remember from those early conversations that parents said, well, they're so little. Isn't it great they're playing together? They don't see race. They don't see color. And I'd love it if you would comment on how you how you teach about that, because of course, if they can see color, right? They're
Absolutely.
just not bringing the baggage of, kind of a lifetime worth of experiences with oppression or assumptions, right? They're just not bringing that baggage with them. Would you comment on how you actually not just bring the kids along, but perhaps the parents along in those conversations?
Right. If I'm not mistaken, I think the research shows that as early as 3 years old, kids recognize race. So, to try to pretend that there's no difference is not being authentic. I think what people need to understand that difference is not deficit. Just because someone is not the same doesn't mean that they're less than or that there's a problem. And many times, sometimes, and I'm sure you may have experienced this as well, you might be out in public and you'll see a little kid make a comment about somebody's color or someone's race, and the parent responds with being embarrassed or trying to shush them. And that is negative behavior because that says to the child that something's wrong with this difference. And so being able to acknowledge the difference and talk about it, the fact that someone's skin is darker or lighter than ours doesn't really mean that they're a different person or they're a bad person. And getting kids to react and share what they're feeling emotionally about it, rather than trying to shut them down, having an honest conversation, using teachable moments. I mean, kids are even looking at programs on TV, and we all know how the media really hinders our efforts toward equality and equity. But when you see something on TV where a person's being of a different racial groups being depicted in a way, having a conversation with your kid about, so what do you think about that? And what do you think that means? And then share some of your views, to the extent that it's appropriate. But many times, because the parents aren't comfortable about talking about race, they try to pretend that it didn't even happen, or try to discount that it really even makes a difference. But using those teachable moments to acknowledge, yes, there is a difference, and also being intentional about bringing into your home positive images, positive situations that counter some of the negativism that you see out there in the public and in the media. A lot, when we've talked to parents in mixed race groups, parents have talked about having books in their home, books that reflect people of different races and different colors. So when your child sees it, it's not like it's the first time they're being exposed to that it's a natural part of life and of the world. And particularly, as you mentioned earlier, Corinne, about what's happening with the demographics, our kids, all of our kids need to be prepared to function effectively in a world that is becoming more and more non-white, at least in the United States.
I want to tell you, you're very passionate about the work you do, and you come from a corporate background. So what led you to embrace this as a full-time job?
That's kind of interesting. While I was at AT&T, I've had people say that I was kind of a square peg in a round hole, because I'm all about the people in corporate America, in the community, wherever we find ourselves. I mean, we're human before we're anything, and that our humanity trumps our corporate position, it trumps our financial advantage. So I'm about people getting to their best place and giving the best that they have and getting the best that they deserve. And so this was kind of a natural fit for me, because I tend to be a collaborator, and I tend to be able to bring people of differing backgrounds and perspectives together. I can kind of find that middle ground. And so recognizing that that's been something given to me as a gift, if you've got a gift, then I think you have a responsibility to share it. Started out after I left AT&T, which was my corporate gig for 17 years. I felt that I had been so blessed in my life in so many ways that I really needed to give back to the community. And so I started volunteering with the coalition. And as I volunteered more, it became evident that the organization wanted more of my time. And it was a passion for me. It was less of me giving than kind of getting. It was a very mutually fulfilling experience. So since I left corporate America and I had my own business, started to talk to the organization about putting together a win-win situation where I could spend more time working for the coalition at the same time, as someone mentioned earlier, kind of pay the bills. I think you were talking about Kim, right? I don't work full time, just to clarify that. We are a small staffed organization. There are actually, we have 1.5, full-time equivalents. So I work, well, what I work and what I'm supposedly supposed to work are two different animals because of my passion. I'm supposed to be working part-time 20 hours, and it's not unusual for me to work 40 hours because when you do something you love, you don't look at the clock and stop. You do what you need to do. And a lot of the work that I do is out in the community. So, you're talking with people, you're meeting with people, time flies. So I've been doing this as, I guess, a full-time experience with a part-time position for, goodness, close to 20 years. And I can't imagine doing anything any differently because I think it's just so important. I think a lot of the reason why we don't make more progress with racism is people consider it as an option. It's kind of it's soft, it's fluffy, it's something you do when you've got time and when you've got money. And if we really want to solve the problem, we've got to put the resources and the effort to really go deep and do the work. Our organization here in New Jersey is one of few in the entire country. And when we first started, there were 3 or 4, and now that's dwindled down to ourselves and maybe 1 or 2 that are doing it, limping along, quite frankly. And so we have to give a lot of credit to our community that sees the value and to our town government. We have a progressive government here because a lot of the work that we do has been and continues to be supported by some government funding. We have over time reduced the amount of that government funding, but the work that we do is funded primarily through donations, individual, very few corporate, and grants that we write. And all of the services that we provide are free for the most part. I mean, we try to get the best to come and educate our community, to share with our community, and as you know, that does not come with a small price tag. And we have a lot of allies, both in individuals and in other organizations in our community that see this work as very important. One of the things I want to make sure that I share with you and with the rest of our listeners is the distinction that we think is very important between diversity and racial integration. People often say they want to live and work and study in a diverse community, but diversity is having a combination, a variety of people from different backgrounds. Integration is utilizing that combination in a positive and constructive and enriching way. So you can live in a neighborhood that's very diverse. People come out of their houses, they never even say hello, but it's diverse. Integration means that you're actually interacting and enriching each other's lives, and you're getting the advantage of the differences that you have. So rather than ignoring or suppressing the difference, you leverage the differences so everybody comes out having more than if they just had their own particular background and experience. So we're about integration beyond diversity. Diversity is a start, but integration is the goal, where everybody's giving and getting the best of who and what they are.
I love that. That really parallels a lot of my work within organizations where we start talking about or shift from a conversation solely about the composition of a workforce, that it's, sort of the differences, broad dimension of differences between human beings, to what it means to have a culture of inclusion, a culture of belonging. So I'm so glad to hear that there are parallels developing in communities and figuring out the ways that people live together. And I love that you have really the benefit of time in this space, because one thing that I've been curious about is, what are you noticing in terms of the trends? So certainly the founding of the coalition may have been steeped in really trying to address white flight.
Yes.
So what would you say, what's happening currently? What do you see if we were to look at the trend line in terms of demographics within the community where you live and now work? What are you noticing about who's coming in, who's staying, who's leaving? What's concerns about any of those factors?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question because we started our work for the coalition working on almost a supply-demand kind of model, meaning that if you have a community that's excellent and has great appeal in terms of its housing stock, in terms of its educational systems, that everybody's going to want to live here, no matter what race they are. And so when we started to see, when the demographics started to shift and we started to see people of color, Black people in particular, start to move into Maplewood South Orange, which back in the early 80s was almost predominantly white, as people started to move in and we started to see, out of ignorance, out of fear, out of panic, some white families putting up their for sale signs and moving out, then the anecdote was to let's make sure that everybody understands what a great community this is. And we started to do publicity in areas, whether it was in Brooklyn, whether it was in parts of New York City, what have you, about how this is a great place to live for all people. As a result of that, we started to see actually shifts in neighborhoods that were adjacent to predominantly Black areas. We saw the rate of shift start to slow and in some cases stabilize. And we've been able to maintain that over the decades. But what we also saw is that as we started to promote this as a great place to live, that people who were not of color started to flood in too. So before, our issue was a problem of white flight, and now through a recent demographic study that we completed, the first version back in 2016, the numbers show that we are losing incoming Black people, which was a little bit of a surprise to just about everybody. The trend started, or the suspicion started, in our elementary schools, where we started to see there were some classrooms where there was just a handful of Black kids in an entire classroom. And that had been a reversal from what we had seen initially, where the concern was that all the schools were going to shift and become predominantly Black. So we started to look from the elementary schools up to middle school into high school, and the numbers show that if the trend continues, our Black population was going to be in the minority in a very short period of time. So we've now shifted our focus from trying to attract people who are not of color to making sure that the Black community feels welcome and supported here, so we can maintain the people that are here and that we can increase our attractiveness to those who might be looking for a great place like our community. So it's a bit of a shift, and that's one of the things that in the work that we do, you have to stay ever vigilant, because if you're talking about integration, we don't have quotas. There's no number at which we all panic and say, oops, it's time to change pace. But we want to keep a good mix. We generally look at the mix in our region and in our state to see if we're underrepresented. I mean, that's kind of a red flag if we start to see that we're much lower than the mix across the state. So you have to change tactics depending upon what the demographics are showing. And we have a marketing committee as part of our major components of the organization. And we are actually launching a marketing campaign to try to increase the awareness within the Black community to people who are like-minded of what a great place this would be to live. So in social media, we're going to be doing some video podcasts, doing things that are kind of testimonials that talk about what is it like to live in this community and why might you want to live here as a person of color. Our focus right now is particularly with our Black community, but we have similar focus for our Hispanic and our Asian communities, where we see that our numbers are below our regional area. But you never really arrive. It's a very dynamic process, and you have to stay vigilant and continue to be willing to shift gears and tactics as the numbers indicate.
I think that's really, really interesting that the coalition is intentional in its work to create communities that work and play together for real.
For real. I love you said for real. For real, for real. We think that social integration is kind of the last frontier. You mentioned, I think, Kim in particular, that people expect that you're going to work with people of different races. In the schools, we would expect or hope that our kids would go to school with kids who don't look like them. But when you come down to social integration, that's where the bets seem to be off. We expect a lot of our kids, but then when they look at who our friends are, who's coming to our dinner parties, our cocktail parties, who we're socializing with, many times those of us in the older generations don't reflect or mirror what we expect of our own kids. So the social integration is intentionally trying to build a network that reflects what we say we really believe. And so when our kids look at who's coming over to our homes, it seems very, very natural and organic to them that they would have friends as well of different backgrounds and different races. And that's an area where we need a lot of work. We try to make it organic and not, rather than systematic and forced, by pulling people together around common interests. So we have something we call integration through the arts, where we know that art brings people together. If you love music, if you love theater, if you love to paint, you get a people in a room, no matter what their background and race might be, who share those common interests, and conversation just kind of naturally breaks out. So a lot of what the coalition does is try to provide opportunities for people who might not normally be in the same room to come together around things that they feel strongly about, whether it's their kids or whether it's art. And from those personal encounters, they can build authentic relationships. A lot of the racism is built on the fact that people only know one or two white or black people. So they're taking their cues from those limited experiences. But when people have the opportunity to work with a number of people of different backgrounds and have a positive outcome, that helps to break down and shift all those stereotypes.
So in your work with the coalition, what would you say have been some of your most important wins?
I think the marketing program, where we were able to shift the trend I mentioned earlier. A lot of our neighboring communities had similar demographic, but over time, they totally shifted, or what we call resegregated. So communities that had been all white ended up shifting to being all black. We have been able to stay the course. And I think that coalition is not the only factor, but many times when we talk to people about why they moved here, how they learned about the community, they'll talk about either promotions that they've read, tours that we've given, showing people that all the different neighborhoods, so that people of a particular race don't end up in only one area. That was something that we initiated years ago, and a lot of people still talk about how they ended up moving here as a result of that. The integration changes in the schools, that has been a major focus for us. We were the first group to bring to this community the whole idea of the academic achievement gap. We brought experts in. As a result of it, the school district has adopted cultural competency training. We've also been instrumental in the district having not just job fairs, but diversity fairs to try to increase the representation of minority faculty and staff. We also have kept conversations going. One of the trademarks for the Community Coalition on Race is something we call conversations on race, because it all starts with a conversation. If people are not talking, nothing's happening. True enough, you can't just only talk, but you have to have candid conversations. And one of our big wins is getting people in a room of different racial backgrounds, sitting around tables in small groups, and talking candidly about issues that are important to them around race. We do this in a way that's facilitated, so it's not a free-for-all. People don't fear that they're going to walk into a room and get attacked, or that someone's going to be inappropriate in the language that they use. The facilitators are trained and making sure that everybody gets a say. And from those conversations, you really are able to increase your perspectives, and we're able to come up with shared solutions that people are willing to leave that room and actually go and do some work on, and some actual relationships. When people leave those tables, when they see themselves out socially, they now have a name to go with a face, and to start to try to build some trust.
Wow, what a wonderful set of accomplishments. You and your team of what was it, 2 FTEs? Have lots of things to be proud of.
But I have to give all the credit to our volunteers, because that's where most of the work happens. We always have far more ideas than we've got hands and minds to get engaged. So a lot of my responsibility and a lot of the effectiveness that I think I bring is getting out there and working with other people and helping them see their role in making this a reality. And we've got a lot here that we treasure, but it's very vulnerable. And if you don't keep working at it, with the pressures coming politically and other places, you could lose it very easily.
So I have one final question I just want to squeeze in. So if there's someone out there with passion who, like you, may have a 9-to-5 gig, but really is called to do some work in community, that place where they live, they want to kind of step into a model like yours. Are there 1 or 2 quick tips that you might give them in terms of getting started?
I would say that's a tough one, only because there are not, in our community, we have lots of options, but as we talk to neighbors and surrounding communities, we find that's not always the case. We often will go out and sit down and talk with a group of interested residents from other towns who want to do similar work. But if you're working a full-time job, the thought of starting a new organization is probably not the first thing that you're looking to do. I think that if you can reach out to other projects and maybe try to set some priorities, you can't do everything, and figure out in your particular community, what are the pulse points? What are the main things that you really would want to work on first? Is it something in the schools? Is it something in the neighborhood? Is it something involving community policing? Figure out what your area of interest is, and then maybe you could even do meetups. Try to find some like-minded people that you can come together and start talking about what you can do realistically. Because, as a person who's been through corporate America, I understand what it means to have little time. I know I couldn't have done this work prior to that, because I didn't get involved until actually I left. But if you can identify your interests, I would say number 1, try to find like-minded people and that look at other models outside your community that are working in those particular areas. We get phone calls, emails all the time from California, all over the country, where people have heard about the work we're doing and they want to know, how can we have maybe just 1 conversations on race? And we are willing to share whatever information we have, and we're not the only ones out there doing it. So first is going inward first before you go outward. Understand where your areas of interest are, and then try to get some support, and then get information from other resources.
Wow, that's fantastic, Audrey. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I have to applaud you and the coalition, because you are nationally known for your work and have been included in important works like that of Dr. Tatum's most recent book. This kind of work can't be forgotten, and we are just delighted that you joined us today. And our thanks go out to the residents of South Orange and Maplewood for continuing this work for more than 2 decades.
Well, thank you. And I think the biggest compliment and show of support for those listening would be to, we need to put the issues of race on the front burner and be willing to be an upstander, not a bystander. When we see things that are involving race, rather than kind of turning a blind eye and walking away, speak up, bring it to the attention of the person, no matter whether they be Black or white, because awareness is critical to us getting through this whole issue of racism.
What a wonderful final word. Thank you, Audrey. We really, really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
That's our show for today. Look for the latest installment of the Visible Women podcast every other Wednesday, where we tackle issues and experiences that relate to appearance, diversity, and inclusion, and that are relevant to our lives. Check out our website, visiblewomenpodcast.com, where you can follow us on all of our social channels. And make sure you join our Facebook group for a follow-up discussion on today's topic. Until then, here's to all the visible women out there. Never forget that we see you.